Hello everyone, I'm under attack. Anyways, I'm back with this, and as I promised, I'm going to talk a bit about Capcom. A bit of my history? Well, where do I start? Well, there's a lot to talk about because of their current state and how I feel and, the sentimentality I've had with them. Because I've been playing Capcom games since, I think the earliest one I played was DuckTales. Not the NES version, the Game Boy one. I was the weirdo with the Game Boy copy. And it was great. Mega Man, it was great. I mostly played Mega Man X because I just didn't play any of the NES ones when they came out, but classic stuff. They are one of the biggest and arguably best Japanese third-party companies. I mean, they really meant a lot of people, and I'm not sure you guys heard, they aren't doing very well. I think it's like 152 million in the bank. A lot of games, like Grand Theft Auto cost $200 to... not 200. Oh, I wish it was $200. Can you imagine that? Atari Grand Theft Auto. But 200 million to make and advertise, and that was a big blockbuster on last generation. We're going into newer generations with bigger budgets and more production values and more effort and just eat, crit, and die. That is an awesome name. I'm sorry, but I'm not going to join you. But yeah, Capcom is... I'm sorry, I must not tear up because it hurts me to see them fall so hard. I guess I should start with each franchise and what they did wrong. Probably the one most people draw attention to are Mega Man and Resident Evil. Two series that kind of screwed up, and they were their biggest franchises, and they just screwed up. Okay, Mega Man. I loved Mega Man X, X2, X3. I even liked X5. Even once I went to the PlayStation era, it was pretty good, except X6 and the PlayStation 2 ones. But Mega Man, it has such a legacy. The music, the creative bosses, all the boss fights had such a strategy to them. It was always great to dissect, and it just gave a series which just seems so simple a little bit of depth, and that was rare around the NES. The series was formulaic, but it means a lot to a lot of people. You still see classic remixes of Mega Man X and Mega Man and all that floating around the internet, and people are still remixing it because it's great music, it's great things. And this sort of attachment to the brand is something I think Capcom should take note of, because they've been making so many mistakes and spitting in the faces of so many of their fans lately that I'm kind of thinking they brought their failures on themselves. Because I'm just going to tell you this, you can't have contempt for your fans. You can't ignore their requests, and when people keep screaming, this is what I want, this is what I want, I'll pay money for it, and it's getting so loud, and you can't really say, well, we know better for you, we know what people want, and then when you start failing because your product isn't selling, you can't argue that, yes, we still know what people want. That's the case with Mega Man and Resident Evil. They feel that people don't want Mega Man, they don't think there's a huge market for it, they want big budget blockbusters, they want to be Activision or EA, and they aren't. I can see where they're coming from. They in some ways are in a lot of ways. The constant re-releases of Street Fighter 4, the versions of Monster Hunter, and don't get me wrong, Monster Hunter is a great game, but when you really boil down to it, you're doing the same sort of motions each time. You're going in, you're fighting your standard generic herbivore, sponge enemies, and then going up to the dinosaurs, and it is the same game every time, and that's fine. I don't have a problem with games like Monster Hunter. I don't have any issue with Madden or Call of Duty, because as long as they aren't bad, as long as someone gets some enjoyment out of them, they're not what I call bad games. But my issue is the fact that you can't, I think that you can't overly rely on them, and you also need to keep in mind what you have and what people want. And there gets to be a point, and I think that point has not only it's doing a serious blow to your company and everyone in it, where the fans are just sort of saying, hey, you know what, you've been making some really boneheaded decisions. And I could go on. Mega Man, you know what they did. They canceled game after game after game. It was just a string of cancellations, and they just... everything that people were looking forward to. And you know what the biggest problem is? They gave false hope. They know Mega Man fans feel kind of neglected because there just hasn't been any good games. There hasn't been any good games in a long time. It's seen as an old school series, and I hate that. I hate that a lot of older cartoony games are seen as old school, because it's up to the developers to invent them in a way that brings in old fans and brings in new. And you can't really just dismiss it because Mega Man's this cute little boy with a blaster arm, because you know what? You know, they can do good stuff with that. Cute games can still sell. Mario Kart sells. Sonic still sells. So you don't really have any excuse to say, hey, Mega Man isn't what people want. Because what are you going to do? Are you just going to make it into a generic Gears of War clone? Mega Man firing like freaking bullets, real bullets from his gun and blowing apart robots and oil and oily guts flying everywhere? No, you don't have to do that. I mean, that's not how you do it. Reinventing things for a gritty approach has to be done right, and I don't think certain franchises are meant for it. Look what they did with Bomberman early on the Xbox 360. What a mess that was. It is frustrating, and this whole it needs to be a million, billion, gajillion seller or else it's not worth our time is not how you should think. Heck, make Mega Man games on a smaller budget. Legends had a smaller budget. Mega Man 9 and 10 had smaller budgets, and you can do that. You can do a smaller budget and set your expectations lower. You keep the franchise alive, you keep your fans happy. Just don't say, hey, you know what, it's not going to bring in insane amounts of coins, so it's not worth our time, because you need that smaller kind of groundwork. You need your cheaper titles, and that's what's hurting them now, is they expect everything to... That's indicative of a problem as a whole. You know what? I said before, I don't have any issue with Call of Duty, but every game shouldn't be approached with the direction, we need to outsell Call of Duty, or need to sell comparable to it, because you don't. You really don't. People, I think, just get greedy, and they lose sight of what makes sense for their brand. And Resident Evil, going on to it, that's the key problem with it. Resident Evil 4 was a more action-based game, but it actually did have some good horror elements. It was scary, it was very body horror, and there was tension, and it was just a game that was masterful in its pacing. It was scary when it needed to be, it was adrenaline-packed when it needed to be, and it really felt like this classic. It was this classic horror story that everyone seemed to appreciate. The horror fans, even some of the horror fans, there were horror fans who didn't like Resident Evil 4, and while I will admit it isn't as scary and isn't very old school Resident Evil, it feels like a horror movie. It does feel like something you would see out of a movie theater. You go in, character lost in this strange land, there's all these crazed villagers, or there's something wrong with them, but they leave you in the dark that what's wrong with them, and it builds this tension until you actually see what's messing with their heads, and it's scary. 5, it was like, take 4, make the graphics a whole lot better, but let's take away the tension, the fear, any kind of mystery. I mean, they tried to have mystery with the whole Ouroboros thing, but it really didn't work. And it just sort of became action schlock, and it was entertaining, and I will give them credit. Some parts, especially early on, did have some tension. Like when you're going through the village and you don't see that many enemies, it's just, you see this dead goat covered in flies, and you're like, ugh, this place doesn't look very good. Yeah, that was great. Good job. That actually had some tension and felt like Resident Evil 4 sequel. But it sort of lost focus later on. There were some things that really sucked about it. It was more of a straight-up action game. It was entertaining. The graphics were great. The gore was excellent in that game. Even though they really toned down a lot of the death scenes, there was a lot of stuff to like in Resident Evil 5. Now 6 came along. I don't think 6 is as bad as people say. And in fact, you will find a subset of people who appreciate 6 more than 5 because it's trying new things. It just really didn't work. How should I put this? Resident Evil 6 is the Resident Evil movie I always wanted. It feels very large scale, it's really epic, and it just feels more like the movie I wanted. Forget the Paul W.S. Anderson movies, Resident Evil 6 is the movie I want. The problem is, when you put all sorts of these quick-time events and big Call of Duty-esque set pieces to make this feel like this end-of-the-world, holy smokes, the apocalypse thing, that's not the best way to do a zombie apocalypse. I haven't played The Last of Us, but I heard that's a game very good at developing a sense of tension and making you feel like a zombie apocalypse in a scary way, as not a zombie apocalypse as in World War Z. And World War Z was an interesting movie, and I was actually surprised that there were scenes with tension, I was expecting it just to be all action schlock, but the later half did have some scary moments, even if it was toned down for a PG-13. But I'm getting off track here. To me, there was very little tension. 6 had some great monster design. 6 had some of the best monster design the series has ever had, and had some great production values, and there was just so much of it that screams effort that they poured their heart and soul in it. But technically, it's a mess. My biggest problem is perspective. Seems like a minor complaint, and it doesn't seem like something that would ruin most games. But in Resident Evil 6, they tried to have a free-moving camera, which is something people asked for in 5, but the camera's always over people's shoulders, so the slightest twitch and the slightest movement, especially when you're indoors, just destroys the camera. You cannot see what's going on. It is a mess. I can't believe they botched it that bad. I haven't seen it this bad. I'd take the tank controls in the older Resident Evils, to be perfectly honest, because you can adapt to those, and you can sort of put yourself in the mindset to appreciate what it is. In 6 you can't. 6 has a lot going for it. There is some good story. There is some good... You catch up on characters you haven't seen in a while. And I always gotta commend Capcom for just trying to take this in a new direction, but the direction they chose was just such a messy game, and I understand why it didn't sell as well, because people aren't stupid. A lot of people say, oh, everyone buys the same old action game every year, kind of stupid. Well, you know what? People get their money's worth with that, because, you know, it's addictive online. You get a little bit of fun with your friends or some random strangers and just have a dumb, fun blast. It's like buying a Michael Bay movie, or going to see a Michael Bay movie, and that's fine. That's fine. But, I think the problem with Resident Evil 5 is it's just not the game to do this. If you look at The Last of Us, if you look at a lot of even Resident Evil 4, it understands that you do need horror to be horror. And 5, how should I put this? You're putting so many freaky images and big explosions, and explosions have people have become so desensitized to stuff blowing up, it doesn't become scary or threatening. It's more, holy crap, cool, and I guess that's what they were going for, but it doesn't belong in Resident Evil. I'll give you a good example. Resident Evil 4 had a scene where you were going into a castle, this haunted castle. Well, it wasn't really haunted, but that's the vibe they were going for. Big spooky castle, and you were just going along, there was this ominous chanting, you didn't know who lived here, it was definitely these cultist sort of things, at least by the way they sounded and the way this whole town was set up, and you just, all of a sudden, a catapult, like an old medieval catapult, flings a flaming ball at you, and it hits and smashes through, I don't know if it's a gazebo or what, and it catches you off guard because you didn't experience anything like that before in the game, so the explosion is scary. Now, you rarely see that many explosions. The most explosion-y, that's not a word I know, it gets in 4 is near the last little bit, and even then you're running into regenerators in the sewers, and there is more than enough things that actually come across as frightening in 4 that it just feels like it punctuates the action and you don't feel blurred to it. When you're putting in this whole bomb going off and Leon and, what's her name? Oh, I forget her already, she's that forgettable. Try to escape from a freaking tsunami of flying cars while you press a button really fast. It looks cool. Again, this is a great Resident Evil movie. But you've tried to turn Resident Evil into sort of Call of Duty, and it's not. Even then, people don't play Call of Duty for the campaign. It's a fun extra if you want to basically play through a Michael Bay movie. That's a fun extra. You're not going to devote your time to it. You're going to go online, you're going to level up, play with the different guns, get bored in a few months, and, you know, rinse repeat when the next game comes out. Just to refresh your interest and all that. But Resident Evil 6 didn't have the addictive multiplayer. It had a multiplayer component. You could play it co-op, but it's not that great at co-op, at least compared to 5. And on top of that, there was a multiplayer mode. There was that hunting mode where you could play as the different monsters. They didn't control very well. There's Mercenaries. The Mercenaries mode wasn't nearly as addictive as past ones, largely because of the botched control. It just didn't flow well. And that's the thing, that's what hurts so much, is that I want to say they're trying to be Call of Duty, but they've missed the mark so much that they don't get why it has appeal. And they just think, hey, it's big explosions and action, Hollywood effects, and that's what's gotten people interested. And partially, that's what frustrates me. Like, if you're going to imitate something, imitate it well. And if you can't imitate it well, don't do it at all. You can't. That's a very important rule. What was I gonna say? This was actually quite indicative to what I was gonna talk about and why I don't think Resident Evil's working. Oh yeah, see, there was a release called the Operation Raccoon City, and it was designed to be a more action-based Resident Evil because we don't have enough else. Well, the general gimmick is that it was a straight-up third-person shooter in Resident Evil, and okay. First I thought, oh, so does that mean this is the action Resident Evil and the series is going back to its roots? You know, I'm not expecting them to go back to old tank controls. I'm not expecting them to abandon the action because it's gotten its new fandom that way. That would be they're as much Resident Evil fans as the old school ones. I'm sorry to admit. They're just a different kind of fan. But they're allowed to be what they are. So, that was a perfect opportunity. Hey, Capcom, you can have it both ways. You can have your big action blockbuster with the Operation series, maybe, and go around shooting each other and co-op like Gears of War stuff, and that'll be great, yeah. You can bring your mutants and all that. You can have this whole entourage of baddies, and you can have them go to war with them, and big cities of battlefield. That would be great. Do that. The game came out, and it sucked, and this really is bad, because this is a huge missed opportunity to branch out the series into two directions so they can please both people. Operation Raccoon City should have been the game that, you know, brought action to the series in a way that everyone can enjoy, and so the Resident Evil horror fans could play it and they could get to fight all their favorite monsters in a new light, and the Resident Evil series could just be, you know, horror, survival horror, and that way they could please both. But when they botch it so bad, they give it to a developer that doesn't know what they're doing, it just boils down to, hey, you've ruined that opportunity. You didn't make sure it was quality, and by ignoring that quality, just with this release, you've lost that potential for a franchise. I got a picture. Heck, even, what was it? Resident Evil Dark Side, what was the one before it? Resident Evil Umbrella Chronicles? That was an on-rail shooter, and it was alright. It was a fairly good game. I actually like Darkside Chronicles a lot more because it expands the lore and just feels more fun to play, shaky cam aside. But those were good games, and it managed to be popular enough to warrant a sequel, so Operation should have been able to do that. It was Gears of War Resident Evil. So, if that didn't work, I just figured, hey, you know what, at least we got Resident Evil 6. Came out, it was an action game. I hate to tell Capcom how to do their job. Oh wait, I don't hate to tell them. Make that one the action game and one the horror game. But fortunately, they have said Resident Evil 7 is borrowing influence from Tomb Raider and Last of Us, which is a good thing, because both of those games, I've only played Tomb Raider, but I know The Last of Us is a good game, and I know Tomb Raider from experience is a great game I've played myself, and I really enjoyed. So, yeah, I don't know what they were thinking. They really screwed it up. But here's the thing. If they're going to make Resident Evil 7, there's a new generation of systems out, and you need to... Capcom is in a very poor position financially. I would love to see them make a new Resident Evil and incorporate all the best aspects of their competitors' games, and... because those games, honestly, like, I've heard people say Tomb Raider is a better sequel to Resident Evil 4 than Resident Evil 5 was, largely because it has that whole sort of cultists on an island, well, not really, 4 or 5 weren't on islands, but it has this sort of being alone in desperation with an island, why did I say an island again, with cultists, and you're fighting these monsters and all this, and it's sort of makes me think that, hey, this actually works better. It has more exploration, it's more open-ended, you got the whole old-school Resident Evil appeal there too. And you have stuff to collect and lots of hidden secrets, and there's a good element of horror within Tomb Raider. It actually gets kind of scary, and there's a lot of moments where you have to watch out or you get killed in extremely brutal ways. So, If Tomb Raider is more like Resident Evil, you have a problem there. Oh, yep, time to take my spec. Demonology. That's what I'm going with. Gorgiles, Sly Kicks. Everything's ungodly. Okay, so let me try this. What's this do? Metamorphosis. Temporarily transform a demon. Ooh, that's interesting. I wonder if I can apply that to my hotkeys. I want to do that. It's a temporary thing, right? Yeah. So, yeah. I've given my spiel on Resident Evil, why they've screwed up royally with the franchise. And that's the thing, Revelations was great. I honestly think they released Revelations on consoles just as a way of apologizing. Because if you want to play a good horror-based Resident Evil that gets what made 4 good, play Revelations. The only thing Revelations is bad at is it does not have a good story at all. It's nonsense. It's like this bizarre sort of mix of the Divine Comedy, you know, the whole Dante's Inferno sort of story, and it doesn't work. The story of that game does not work. It's convoluted. It's just not good. The monster design good, and I love the whole sea life motif. It was actually quite scary. But yeah, I'm going to just go ahead and say that if you want a good Resident Evil, play Revelations. So they are capable of making good games. So yeah, they didn't listen to their fans with Resident Evil. They canceled multiple Mega Man games, and wasn't there like a Mega Man game being made by some people at Retro? Like the people who helped make Metroid Prime and helped revive another character with a cannon for an arm and brought them to the modern age and just introduced the public to them again and did everything 100% right. Okay, maybe not the stupid fetch quest before going to the core in Metroid Prime, but it just reminds me that like you got good people involved, they know what they're doing, they have great ideas for your franchise, and you're not letting them because you say, we don't think anyone wants Mega Man. How many times do people have to say that? And like KJ Ifune, or is he the Mega Man guy or is he the Castlevania guy? I get those two confused. The guy at the company at Capcom who just left because he just said, you know what? My fans want me to make Mega Man. You're not letting me make Mega Man. And that's the sad thing. He left Capcom. He said, hey, I'm making this new game called Mighty Number 9. It's like Mega Man, but it's not Mega Man because I don't have the rights. And it comes out, and oh man, it just shows how stupid Capcom's becoming because there's a whole Kickstarter, and it makes over $1 million. $1 million. No demand for Mega Man. No demand for this type of game. No support for the guy who makes Mega Man. Capcom, get your shit together. And I know I don't swear very much, boys and girls, but that just sums up how I feel. I generally am not a profane person, but that's how I feel about this whole mess. And they're entering a new generation. Okay, and this is what they said. This is actually what's showing. This is actually showing their problems and how divorced from reality they've become. They pretty much said that the way to secure their future is through DLC programs. They're going to basically release games with less and charge more with DLC, which they've done for a while, and they're not in a good financial state. So, actually, I might as well try this out. Hooyah! Demon now. So yeah, listen to your fans, because, hey, you know what? We've proven you wrong before, and we're going to continue to prove you wrong till your grave. And I know how morbid that sounds. Like, I want Capcom to die. No, I don't. I want them to smarten up. They were one of the greatest companies in gaming. So many great games. And you know what? There's some things I can commend them for. I like how they've brought back, they allowed DuckTales to come back from the dead. Did Capcom have any involvement? Because I know Disney was. But that was a great NES game, and it's like, you actually do care to some extent. Because obviously you're letting them do that. And, yeah, there's some things that I just say, like, they released Revelations on consoles. It only came out in 3DS, but it was on consoles then, and just, hey, throwing people a bone. Not everyone plays on handhelds, and that's perfectly respectable. They're allowed to, expand. So yeah, I don't hate Capcom. I hate their decisions. I hate this. They've just been morons. And I'm not one of those insulting, caustic critics who just feels they need to insult Heck, I was on chatting with someone online, and I defended LJN, a company that made all those terrible games on NES, and I'm like, you know what? I don't think Jaws is a terrible game. It's not good, but I gotta admit it tried a bit of an unconventional gameplay design. I mean, it's playable, just not very fun. So yeah. You've heard my opinion, you've heard me vent, you've heard me rant and rave. That's Capcom for you. I don't know what they were doing. Oh yeah, and Street Fighter. I guess I should go into a bit of detail on Street Fighter. Wow, so I guess I can have this as long as that's charged. That's pretty cool. Demon. I better do some, if my throat wasn't so dry, I'd probably start doing the death metal sound. You know that voice where you sound like you're growling? But I can't do that now, I have a sore throat. So, yeah. Street Fighter. They've pretty much said there won't be Street Fighter 5 until 2018. Okay, that time will approach closer than we think. It sounds insane to release Street Fighter 4 for almost like a decade, re-release it. And it is. It really is. And this is nothing new. Capcom has been doing this since, has to be like the 90s, early 90s. Street Fighter 2. Like, do you remember, does anyone remember how many versions of Street Fighter 2 were? Even after Street Fighter 2 stopped, like its main run was ended, we still got HD versions, and those were among the few versions that I feel that, hey, they're warranted. Street Fighter 2 is a classic. HD Remix actually is a good idea to have a community for that, because it is a good game, and it was a way, and it showed Capcom cared. It really did. It showed they cared for their community. They knew Street Fighter was a classic, and people still want to be able to play it online, and just to give it a future in this competitive scene. Good idea. HD Remix was justified. But there were still a lot of versions of Super Street Fighter 2 and Turbo and all that, and it's just an overdone joke. I could basically say over and over again how silly it is that there's so many versions, because it's been run into the ground. I don't really have anything to add about there's a lot of old versions of Street Fighter. That's just how they work, they update. But the main difference, and again, I'm treading over old stuff now, is that it was during an era where you could not update games. If you wanted to get the next, tournament standard back in the early 90s in the Street Fighter scene, you needed to buy a new version. There was no upgrades, you just couldn't update it or have it as DLC. And they've sort of released the updates as DLC. One thing that does bother me, and is getting kind of frustrating for people, is that again, this is a case of Capcom saying something but meaning something else, and they do this a lot. They said that Super Street Fighter 4 was going to be the final version, the definitive version. And I'm not sure what to chalk this up to, with several versions releasing since. I'm not one of those people who says, "Oh, he's a liar, he lied." But I know it's capitalism. Street Fighter 4 is popular, it's a big tournament game, and they want to expand upon it. That I get. However, it's releasing these things that add like 4 or 5 extra characters on shelves for like $80 is kind of, and before you say it's not $80, I live in Canada, sometimes games go up the price. That's what I paid for the baseline Street Fighter 4, and just a few months later they announced Super Street Fighter 4, and this really bugs me. Usually when you develop an expansion or an upgrade or something, you wait for the existing version to stagnate. Get people bored, they've exhausted everything they can out of a game, and there still will be a competitive scene, but it needs to be in decline. And I don't know if it's that Street Fighter is declining more rapidly, like the version Super Street Fighter 4 didn't have the legs they wanted, so they have to keep releasing more. And okay, fine. If I don't want it, I won't buy it. It is frustrating, though, because They've done this repeatedly. Marvel vs. Capcom 3. Great game. It comes out, how many months, or was it even just a month later, we already have the announcement of Ultimate Marvel vs. Capcom 3, because we need more really fast. Yeah, it's frustrating. And their sales decline because it's gotten to the point where fans, they're just saying, is this the last version? Is this the last version? Because if you keep releasing stuff that people are unsure of, and they're going to become, they sort of get uncomfortable buying something because they don't know if they'll waste their money once. Oops, did I sell something good? Well, that's agility, I don't need that. But they'll become unsure, and there'll be this sort of apprehension to buy a new fighter when it comes out, because you've established that every time you do this, you're going to release a ton of versions. And people are going to wait. And when everyone decides to wait, the game will not sell good enough to make you even care to release a later version. So you've killed your own game before it was even released.
We will have justice.
That's the sort of trend you're setting. And combined with a lot of other just bullcrap like the on-disc DLC, including whole characters. How do you do that? How do you release a game with characters and ask you to pay once you buy them? Games cost more expensive than ever. I was still really ticked off when they raised the price of all the PlayStation games, because I went in to get Infamous, and I'm like, really? This is the price you're charging me? And they said, well, that's what Sony's offering. They're price hiking. You know how I defended Sony so much in my last part? I'm not taking it back, but they are kind of getting ahead of themselves, and I hope they don't become their arrogant old self. So yeah. Actually, I should probably stop doing Quest and Eversong, because I'm pretty much done with everything I intend to do. It's a boring zone. So, I've given my spiel, I've spoken my heart out. Capcom, you really have lost a lot of your fandom, you've lost a lot of your credibility, and you've lost a lot of your money. I know you don't listen to me, and you're not going to go looking for WoW videos to find out your answers to your financial problems. I'm just sharing with my fans and my, anyone who manages to watch, because I'm tending to turn this into basically vlogs, how I feel, how it hurts me, how companies, not just Capcom, but Konami, they're just throwing up their hands and saying, our legacy doesn't matter, we need to find something that sells, we need to rob our franchises of what made them great in the first place, and we need to sell out to the lowest common denominator, because you don't. You don't. You can just be a good game, even under a smaller budget. Because, I mean, think about Konami. They do Resident Evil. They did Castlevania Lords of Shadow, which is alright. It's basically Diet God of War. It's not bad, but it's not what people liked about Castlevania. It's very standard. It's very adapting to the Western school of gaming, so it's big Hollywood scores and Lord of the Rings and Skyrim-esque high fantasy genericism, but it's alright, I guess. I'm not hating it, but they really should learn, and they're not learning. Games, I think that's just what... That's why indies are saving games, okay? That's why they're doing that, why they're keeping things alive. Oh no, and you know I use my roleplay. Yeah, I was actually going to be making a role-playing video for you guys. Just me trying to interact with people and develop a character around Puppy Cat. You haven't talked much, Puppy Cat. Please don't tell me I'm phasing you out. Please don't tell me that you're my Chuck Cunningham. Nobody's gonna get that joke. So, yeah. It is kind of hypocritical for me to be talking about how indies and small companies are saving things while I'm playing a big game like WoW, but I think it's really, the point I'm trying to make is still valid. You do need to pay attention to what's starting up, because you become there's sort of a thing I've noticed as a whole, and this could be a rant for a whole other day, that there's sort of this software bloat, that they're trying to put so much into these games to make them so much bigger and better, that you end up kind of potentially hurting the product. Battlefield 4 is an example of this. There's just so much stuff in that game, and I guess more content means it's better, but it really boils down to nobody in that game really wants to stick with the same weapon and get better at it, because there's just so much, it becomes distracting and it hurts its metagame. But I don't have, that's not as fertile of a subject. I can't go on and on and on and rant about it, because there's just not as much to work with. I basically explained my problem just then and there. And, yeah. Thank you guys for listening. Hope you guys like, comment, and subscribe. I'm gonna continue making these. It's summer. The air is, well, it's not summer, but trust me, guys, we're finally having heat again. It's been so, like, cloudy and depressing here in BC. We got a nice sunny day, and I'm happy about it. It's boosted my spirits and made me want to make videos. So, yep, no complaints there. So, next time, I'm going to Silver Pine, and it's going to be awesome. Silver Pine is an awesome, awesome zone. There's actually going to be a lot to talk about actually involving the game. It's exactly Hounds of Honor. Guys, Hounds of Honor. The furry Worgen guilds are on Alliance side.